Good. We are recording. All right. So thank you for this. How do you read what the legislature is doing today?
Um, I read that the legislature feels frustrated with the results of the court case around the redistricting. So they are calling themselves into session to address that frustration.
And some people might characterize this as a power grab by the legislature. I think legislators, many of them would say, this isn't a power grab. We're just trying to hold the authority we've already had. Who's right?
Oh, that is such a good question, right? So the answer is for like over 100 years, the way initiatives have worked, the legislature gets to iterate on those policies. So, and a little bit, I'll tell you, I don't see it as a power grab. I don't think laws that are not like enshrined in the Constitution, right? Like, so we're not talking free speech written into the Constitution. Laws that are policies generally are iterative, right? So you would expect every year if there's some new policy, some new unintended externality out of a policy, you would expect your legislature to do some work to address it. So I think the rub here is in the word the Supreme Court uses, which is intent, right? So can the voters say we intended that a commission would draw the district boundaries, and if we intended that, then that's akin to be enshrined in the Constitution. And I think that's where the conversation, the fight is. So I'm not sure it's a power grab. How do I say? I think it is institutional, interaction over what that word actually means. Does that make sense, Brian? I'm not sure.
It
Yeah.
makes some sense, but let me delve a little bit deeper into this.
Yeah.
You use the term iterative, and iterative, for many people, I think that's not a word they use in their daily life. I think I understand what you're saying, that the legislature can enact iterations or versions thereof. Okay,
Correct.
so there can be different versions thereof, but but the idea is that the legislature feels, apparently, you tell me if this is your sense, the legislature feels, look, we were elected to do a job. Initiatives can pass, but that doesn't mean that we can't still do our job once an initiative passes.
Yeah, I think that's right. So if we think about an initiative as a policy passing, we would expect that policies would change, right? So over time, as you get into a feedback loop, you would expect the legislature to pass new versions of a policy as they get new information. So I think the legislature reads initiatives as, one pass, if you will, at a policy. The rub here is this might have to do with how the government operates. It might have to do with how they draw districts, which maybe requires a constitutional amendment, right? Like, so maybe what we need is a change to the Constitution and not just an initiative
So
to
that's
get
really
the
what the
vote.
legislature is talking about today, too.
Correct. Yes. No, and I don't think they are wrong. Right.
Okay.
And then yeah. So go ahead.
So then there is the other side of this, which is, look, we spent all this time, money, and effort to try to enact change because the legislature wouldn't do it. And so we have done that. We have spent all this time, money, and effort. The initiative passed barely, but it did.
Yeah.
So the will of the people have spoken. And legislature, you can't just ignore what the people have just said. Do they have a
Right. I don't know that they do. So here I go.
okay?
So the answer is we are a republic. We are not a direct democracy. So a little bit the will of the people is supposed to be refined through its elected officials. So, right. Like, so the answer is the people could have voted for this, but it might not actually be the best version of the policy. And so what we need is the feedback loop and the legislature doing its job, which is what they are supposed to do.
Okay.
That's a horrible answer. I'm so
No,
sorry, but
no,
like,
it's a good answer. I want to keep going on this for just a minute.
yeah.
If I were to go out on the street and ask people about legislative redistricting, political boundaries, drawing a new map, even gerrymandering, I think most people really not keyed into that.
Right.
And maybe I'm making an assumption, but I suspect most people really aren't that interested. So why should people care about this whole thing today?
Right. That is a good question. I mean, I think I agree with you that people don't generally know what this redistricting conversation is, mostly because it comes up once a decade, right? So it comes up after the census, and then we have that conversation. So it's not in the daily churn, right? It's not a policy that affects us regularly. So most regular voters, normal people, have no reason to know this. So a little bit, I do think this special session is an institutional fight between the judiciary and the legislature over what the intent and important role that initiatives have in the state. And a little bit, I'm not sure it matters to most people who are not inside of that baseball team, if that makes sense, right? Like
but it's an important question.
Yes.
It's a really important question when you get down to who makes the call.
That's right.
Legislature make the call, or does the court make the call?
Yeah, no. And I think, how do I say, this is just one example to me of recent conversations where the legislature thinks they should be in charge of everything, right? So you see a lot of, I kind of would say it's a feisty legislature, right? So they want to be in charge of everything. The court is sometimes putting the brakes on that and sometimes not. But I would argue we are always frustrated when we don't get what we want in litigation. So I'm not surprised by that institutional infighting. Does that make sense? I don't know if that's, yeah.
How do you think it's going to go today? I mean, I suspect there aren't there's no real drama. They wouldn't call a special session. The leadership of the legislature would not call a special session if they didn't think they had the votes.
Oh my gosh, they called a special session. And so the question you didn't ask that I might kind of ask is,
go ahead.
They are allowed to call themselves into session because of an emergency. I think one fun question is whether the judiciary making a ruling counts as an emergency, right? So a little bit, I think we might want to revisit what emergency means in that language when we made those changes to allow the legislature to call itself into session. But I think they are calling themselves into session because they know that they can change the way initiatives work, that they can get that on the ballot and make those changes in November very quickly.
Yeah. And this could set off a fight too, as well. I mean, a pitched fight between now and November.
That is correct. Now it opens up, what was already going to be an intense election season, maybe nationally, but maybe it causes, how do I say, people inside of Utah who might not otherwise be paying attention because maybe the presidential election is a foregone conclusion. Now I'm paying attention because I'm frustrated about this thing that you're talking about. And I think that's kind of fun for the dynamics of what voters we see coming out. Does that make sense? Like it kind of acts as
for a topic that is boring, this could get exciting.
It could be very exciting. Yeah.
All right. That